Yeah. Okay, so let's jump straight into it. So I believe I have 30 minutes, is that right? So I'll try to stick to my time and wind up by 7:45. Just a second. Yeah, so when Salma gave me this topic, what she told me was that she'd like me to talk about a legal checklist of sorts for startups, right? So I was very happy to take this on, because this is something that I do on a daily basis almost, because a lot of the work that I do is in terms of working with startups, working with venture capital funds, and doing a range of fundraising transactions, as well as helping startups with a range of problems that they may typically have. So so how I thought I'd do this is because I found again the topic very nicely put, right? So it was in the form of a checklist. So what I thought is, how better to do this than to actually do it in the form of a checklist that we typically as lawyers use in our transactions, right? So what kind of a checklist am I talking about? I'm actually talking about the way in which lawyers conduct due diligence on startups, right? So we look at a range of heads. So I thought that in this checklist, I would actually go through the different types of heads that we look at. So that may give you some kind of insight, and hopefully it is both informative and useful to everyone here. So let's start with the basic and the first item of the checklist, right? Which is basically your corporate matters. Okay, so the suggestion that I would give to all startups is create a good culture of corporate governance early on. Okay, and this will carry you through very far. It will make your ease of closing transactions quicker. Reminder, I'd like to share an anecdote here. When I first joined the present law firm more than a decade ago, one of the first deals I did was an investment by a well-known VC fund into a new startup, right? Now, interestingly, the startup was formed by these gentlemen who were all, sort of middle-aged, I would say, and who had spent the better part of their working lives in a very well-known Indian consumer giant, okay, which is known for its good culture of corporate governance, right? So when I first shared a legal diligence checklist, we typically expect, the startups to take about anywhere between a week to 2 weeks to give us all the documents. And then even then it comes in a piecemeal fashion. We have to keep following up, chasing up, so on and so forth. So imagine my surprise when I got a call a week later saying, ma'am, the diligence room is ready. Please come down and have a look whenever you're ready. And so then I went to the office. Okay, so there was one wire, filing rack with neatly arranged box files, numbered and sequentially arranged in the order of my checklist. All available documents are punched, they are filed. So I was able to complete my review in a day's time. That is unheard of. Okay, it is absolutely unheard of for a diligence process to get over so smoothly. And it happened because the founders had that culture of good corporate governance, which they set up their company with that in mind, saying that we'll do everything by the book. We will make sure that our records are well maintained. So I think that was the first and last time in my career that we were able to both sign and close that deal in 1 month. Okay, simply because of the state of readiness. Okay, so never underestimate the power of instilling a good culture of corporate governance right from the beginning. And where does it start, right? So I think it really starts with retaining a very competent company secretary who can help you with a lot of these things, okay? And this is connected, in fact, to your choice of business entity, right? So I'm sure all startups will be wondering, how is it that I should set up my business, okay? Should I do a proprietorship, a partnership, private limited company? Should I incorporate in India or overseas, right? There are lots and lots of questions. The advantages, I'm sure all of you know that typically it's a private limited company that is chosen as the mode of vehicle. Why is this the case, right? Because private limited companies have independent legal personality, right? They can act in their own name, what we lawyers call common seal and perpetual succession, which, unlike proprietorships and partnerships, which are tied to the personalities of their founders, a private limited company has separate existence, and it is also preferred by lenders, investors, so on and so forth. Okay, so that I'm sure many of you know that a private limited company is a typical vehicle of choice. These days, we're also seeing questions from startups about whether we should incorporate in India or overseas. What we typically tell startups is, listen, if you want to incorporate overseas, you better have a very strong business case for doing that, right? Because the costs of doing business tend to rise. So unless you have a very good business case for doing that, don't think about it. Because that leads to a lot of problems later on as well. So it has to be a very well thought out decision. The very first step of incorporating your company, which a good company secretary can help you with, is to have a good set of charter documents with a well drafted objects clause. Again, I'd like to share an anecdote here. This company, it was a software company. They were building certain tech tools for hospitals and other players in the healthcare space. Okay, so when I was looking at their memorandum of association, the objects clause said that the business of the company is to set up healthcare facilities and to run hospitals, nursing homes, so on and so forth, right? So this is obviously a problem, because the law says that a company can only carry on business that it is authorized by its memorandum of association to do. So then there was a business of amending the objects clause to make sure that the business of the company is aligned with what the objects say. So it could be as simple as that. Okay. The other checklist items under the heading corporate matters is, please make sure all your filings are up to date. You must have 4 board meetings a year. You must hold your annual general meeting. So all of these things, a good company secretary can again help you manage. The other common item that we see lack of compliance with under corporate matters is lack of attention to stamp duty. Okay, so why does this become a problem? Why do you need to ensure that your share certificates are duly stamped? Why can't you just, prepare a share certificate and issue it? The problem arises that if somebody has to acquire those shares, okay, say your company is getting bought out, etc. So in case if you have not stamped your share certificates, this becomes a problem, because it creates some kind of color over the title to the sale shares. Okay, so please make sure that you take care of stamping of share certificates. In case there are share transfers, you must make sure that stamp duties are paid on share transfer forms. So a lot of things there, just something to keep in mind. So jumping to the next slide. I'm not sure if you can see my, can see the title. I think you can, the title of this slide is Financing Your Startup. So, okay, thanks. How does a startup raise money to do its business, right? So initially it may be through bootstrapping, right? The founders are putting in their own cash. Then you may rely on money from friends and family. You may raise an angel round, you may go for VC investment, you may go for venture debt, you may approach banks for funding. So there are several options that a startup can think of, and there are different considerations for each of these, right? So it's not a must that you must raise venture capital investment, nothing of the sort. You could build a pretty good business without having to bring in VC funding. But if you decide to do raise funding from say VCs or angels, etc., this checklist that we're going through is pretty much the checklist that would be given to you by such investors, right? Because they want to make sure that all of these items are properly taken care of. So so we'll continue to go through the checklist. So in this slide, I want to look at employment related issues. Okay, so once you've set up your company, you've been able to finance it with a little bit of money, and you're all set to go strong, right? So the first thing that you obviously want to take care of is people, okay? Because people, of course, are core to your business. So what is it that you must keep in mind? Okay, so you first want to make sure that you have a good set of employment agreements. If you're employing consultants, you want to make sure that you have a good template form of agreement for them as well. If you're bringing on board advisors or mentors, so on and so forth, you need to have agreements in place for all of these. So do make sure that you're using good quality documentation, right? There are various clauses that must be taken care of. So this is something that should be looked at and done carefully. In case we're seeing this more popular nowadays, that even with your co-founders, if you'd like to have an inter-se agreement, which sets out various items, including how to resolve disputes between the founders, what happens if you don't agree on the direction in which the business needs to go, how do you inter-se handle financing until you're able to secure outside financing. So a lot of these things, and the reason I'm pointing out things like this is, again, lawyers are accused of being very depressing people, right? Because we always want to talk about worst case scenarios. But when you're very gung-ho about setting up your business, sometimes you don't want to consider this. There is no time to consider this. But God forbid, should such situations arise, it would be good to have some sort of something to fall back on, right? So we've even seen in cases where there have been sort of husband and wife founder teams, right? Where investors have said, listen, you guys please also agree, in case you have a personal falling out, what is going to happen to the shares? How are they supposed to be dealt with? Okay, so there are lots of things that could be considered under a founders inter-se agreement. The other thing to keep in mind is something that's of great interest to everybody, which is ESOPs and how do you structure them, right? So given that the Companies Act, which is the law governing companies in India, only contemplates ESOPs being awarded to employees. It does not contemplate ESOPs being awarded to mentors, advisors, consultants, so on and so forth, right? So what could be some alternatives that you could think of if you wish to compensate these categories of people as well? Would you want to give them phantom stock, right? Would you want to give them shares, issue them shares outright, okay? How would you structure this? So this is again something to obtain legal advice on at the proper point in time. The other problem that we typically see with startups, especially startups which are growing very aggressively, which are hiring employees aggressively, and I think that we are now in a situation where I think across industries, there is such a war for talent because attrition is rife everywhere. Lots of people are just sort of quitting and saying, we just need to take some time off because of the pandemic. We're seeing this across industries, and I'm sure many of you are seeing it as well. There is such a war for talent that people are really, shortcutting their hiring procedures as well, because they're so desperate to hire people. And then what happens is that oral promises are made for shares, saying, sorry, 4 more minutes. Is that a?
No,
that was my mistake.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, please go ahead.
That's one thing I've been already talking for so long.
No. We are in fact ahead of time. This is very important. Please go ahead.
Okay. No worries. Yeah, so we've seen that oral promises are made for shares, right? And so this becomes a real issue because, then it just upsets your cap table, etc. So please don't make oral promises for shares to anybody. Even if you're in a real hurry and you haven't been able to put in place an ESOP policy, make sure that you put in place some documentation. Consult a company secretary, consult a lawyer. It's not difficult to do these things. There are lots of ESOP management platforms also out there now. Because the problem is that the law requires there to be a period of 1 year between the grant of the option and the vesting of the option. Okay, so there is that 1 year cooling period. So if you have made oral promises and then 1 year has passed, 2 years has passed, then it's very difficult to actually give that employee the benefit while also being in compliance with the law, right? So this is again something to be very careful about. Never make oral promises to anybody as regards share capital in the company. That's extremely important. Okay, so we can move to the next heading, which is material contracts. So your material contracts can be any of absolutely any number, different types, right? It all depends on your business. If I had to look at a broad set of contracts, I would say your customer contracts, supplier or vendor contracts, license agreements, dealership agreements, distribution agreements, contract manufacturing agreements. There could be of any number and any type. Now, what happens is that typically startups may not have the bargaining power to insist that the counterparty adopt their format, right? So many a time you may find yourself being forced to live with the format that is being shared with you by the counterparty, which is fine. But please don't ever sign anything without reading it, okay? This is sort of like the worst mistake you can ever make, right? Because the devil is in the details, and the devil can be in the fine print. So if there's one thing I can really urge you all to do, please read whatever it is that you're signing, and try to get a lawyer to look at it for you once if you're not familiar with these types of contracts. Specifically, just listed a few different types of clauses here that you must watch out for, right? Are there any exclusivity provisions? Are you signing something that says that you can only do business with this particular person? You can't offer your service to anyone else. What are the indemnification obligations like? Ideally, what that means is if there is a breach of the agreement, what are the remedies? Okay. Ideally, you should limit your liability to the amount of the contract and not more. There should never be unlimited liability. Are you taking on a lot of information providing obligations under the agreement? Are you agreeing to the counterparty being able to come and inspect your business and your premises? What kind of IP protection is in there? This is especially important for tech companies, right? If you're building a product for a client, who owns the IP in that product? Is it you? Is it the client? Is it some combination? Are there different parts? Are you using third-party components in that software that you're creating? So there could be a range of different issues here that you must be aware of. Okay, so the bottom line is please don't sign any contracts without reading them or getting someone to read them for you. You will, it may save you a lot of headaches later on. The next heading in the checklist is permits, licenses, and approvals, right? So make sure you're getting your basic licenses and registrations in place. So when you incorporate a company, you will get basic things like your PAN or TAN, other taxation related licenses, approvals. You'll open a bank account. When you're opening a physical premises, you'll need a shops and commercial establishments license. You'll need to make sure that you're getting various registrations under applicable labor law. If you're so inclined, you can get a recognition as a startup from the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion. If you're going to be exporting software, you must make sure that you get an importer-exporter code. So there are a whole range of permits, licenses, and approvals that you need to do business in India. So you must make sure that depending on the type of business that you're opening, that you're actually able to get all of these in place. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about foreign investment, because if you're raising funding from venture capitals or angels or non-resident Indians, etc., there are a range of Foreign Exchange Management Act compliances that you must keep in mind. Now, just to give a bit of a background, what is this Foreign Exchange Management Act, right? So India is an exchange-controlled economy, which means that there isn't freely currencies, whether Indian or foreign, can't freely cross the borders, right? So there are some checks and approvals and balances everywhere, right? So here's the simple thumb rule for you to keep in mind. Any transaction, whether it's investment or whether it is monies coming in from abroad as payments for services that you're providing, anything that has an element of crossing India's borders, there would be a Foreign Exchange Management Act implication. Okay, so if you just keep that thumb rule in mind, it will help you a lot. Okay, so various angles relating to foreign exchange would come under the automatic route. So say, for example, you're a pure tech startup raising funds from abroad. You would more or less come under the automatic route, which means you can raise money from abroad. There are only certain things that you need to tell your authorized dealer bank. Okay, what is an authorized dealer bank? It is a bank which is authorized to deal in foreign exchange, which are basically all of your major scheduled commercial banks. And they will require you to make certain declarations, file certain forms, etc., etc. So this actually is a little bit of compliance burden on startups, but it is something that you must take very seriously if you are planning to raise money from abroad. Sometimes what happens, and we see this problem a lot, okay, the initial rounds of fundraise happen from individuals, right? These individuals could be citizens of India residing abroad, or they could be foreign nationals living in India. So the Foreign Exchange Management Act considers residence status to be important, okay? And even these different types of residents could have different types of bank accounts from which they may be funding you, okay? So you won't care, right? The startup would want funds. It doesn't really care where those funds are coming from. Why this becomes tricky is that if you have individuals who are funding money to you, and that money is coming from overseas, then you would need to make sure that the filings are still taken care of. Okay, so this is especially tricky if you're dealing with NRIs. If NRIs are investing from their resident rupee accounts, then that's not treated as FDI. If they are investing from their US dollar denominated, foreign currency denominated accounts, whether in India or abroad, it would be considered FDI, and you would have to make filings. So this area can be a little tricky for startups to navigate, we have seen in our experience. So do make sure that this is something that you keep in mind. Anything related to foreign investment will need some compliances, which you must take care of. Okay, moving forward. Right, so intellectual property, again, a very big and a very important topic. Okay, so this can be of many types and forms, right? So intellectual property encompasses copyright, trademarks, patents, design rights, geographical indications. There's a whole range of items out here. Okay, so you need to have a kind of IP consciousness that how is it that I'm protecting the various IP components of my business, okay? So some types of businesses obviously are more IP reliant than others, okay? But all businesses can take care of a few things. For example, the agreements that you're signing with your employees and consultants, make sure that there are strong confidentiality IP assignment clauses, okay? Make sure that, again, as we mentioned, any contract that you're entering into, please make sure that it's stamped adequately. The legal position around payment of stamp duty is that it's simply this, okay? If you have not stamped a document, okay, that does not make the document invalid. All it simply means is that if you had to enforce that agreement in a court of law, you would first have to pay the stamp duty and up to 10 times the original amount that would have had to be paid before you can enforce that document. So in order to ensure that your documents are legally enforceable, it's a good idea to make sure that they are adequately stamped. Make sure that any third-party intellectual property you're using has been appropriately licensed or assigned. Okay. One common problem we see, especially when there are websites involved, is that the domain name is typically being registered in the name of the founders. Ideally, you should ensure that these domain names are registered in the name of the company, because that is anyway something that you'll be asked to do if an external investor is doing a diligence on you, right? What else? When you're choosing a name for your startup, keep in mind that there are certain kinds of names that are more easily trademarkable than others. Okay, so if you choose a name which is like an ordinary word, okay, it's more difficult to get protection for that, a trademark registration for that. So that's why you have people who are making combinations of names, like slight misspellings. That will make your name more easy to get trademark protection for. Okay. What else? Patents is a separate topic, so I won't really go into that. But yeah, so please do have a think about these IP issues. We see very often, unfortunately, we see what happens is that there's a startup, a senior employee may leave and may take away the set up a competing business with similar IP, similar knowledge, etc. So this becomes difficult to control. So one way of avoiding these situations is to make sure that your contracts and your documentation is robust to avoid these situations. Moving on, various information technology rules are there, and it's becoming almost a bewildering maze of rules that you need to follow, especially when it comes to things like data privacy, okay, which is a very hot topic all over the world these days. So the very basic things that you need to do is to ensure that your website contains a privacy policy and terms of use. And what we typically see sometimes when we're doing diligence is that a startup would have just gone to the website of another startup which is in the similar business, just copy pasted their terms of use and privacy policy and used them for its website without even bothering to change the name of the company. So please don't do that. Please don't take those shortcut approaches. You must be very careful about what information you're collecting, what it will be used for, and who it will be shared with. There should be a grievance officer appointed, and certain other requirements are there under the IT Act. So you should make sure that you're in compliance with these. Moving on. Also, these days we find that there are a lot of innovative new business models which are being used, which are all premised on collecting a lot of data of users. So you must know that if your business hinges on the collection of data from individuals, you must be very careful about how you are dealing with this data, especially because there are global data privacy laws that apply now, with scant regard to borders. So it's worth, depending on your business model, it's worth examining these in more detail, because your investors will definitely ask you to do that. It's better to be safe than sorry. So real estate is another checklist item. Okay. So when you're going for, of course, now there is a lot of popularity to work in co-working spaces and all of that, which removes a lot of these headaches. Okay. But otherwise, if the traditional way of leasing out certain premises, so make sure you do some basic due diligence before you take any premises on lease. Okay. The landlord should be authorized to deal with that property. So please ask for some basic documents. Please make sure you stamp and register the lease deed. Again, that is to ensure the protection of the tenant so that the landlord can't terminate the lease willy-nilly. Make sure that the premises that you're taking on are actually authorized for the purpose for which you mean to use it. So these are some considerations when it comes to leasing property. Purchase of property, of course, requires a higher level of diligence, which we won't go into here. The next checklist item we look at is what sort of litigation or disputes is the company embroiled in. Okay, Again, like I was mentioning, there could be employment disputes or co-founder disputes, disputes with your customers, IP-related disputes. We're increasingly also seeing some level of disputes where, it's the investors on one hand and the founders on the other hand. So keep in mind that ideally you should have some kind of the best way to protect against all of this, to make sure your documentation again is robust. And if things go south, then you have a plan for how to deal with some of these things. Okay. Tax litigation, of course, could be another issue as well that we've seen out here. I think that, yeah, I'm on time, I think. Yes. So maybe if you'd like to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neela. I think it was absolutely valuable. And we can see with the kind of questions coming in. In fact, there are so many questions, even from the live streaming, we've been getting under the comments. So I'm going to take a few questions here. And I'd request anyone here to, if you have any questions, please post it in the chat. We will see as many questions we can, we will take it in. So we'll start off with the first question from Mr. Datta. Should shares be in demat form?
Yeah, so there are certain advantages and disadvantages. So the advantage of having your shares in demat form is the transfer of shares becomes easier. You don't have to go through the process of share transfer forms, etc. But again, there is a cost implication to it. So if you'd like to do it, then by all means do that, because it makes record maintenance simpler. Of course, the cost aspect has to be taken into account.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is from Adil. It is easy to appoint a director, but without resignation, with an ordinary board resolution. It is very difficult to remove a director till MC approves. Do we have to share all company details with outgoing director?
So this, I think, is sort of like a fact. It's a very factual analysis. So difficult to, give a general comment. Happy to discuss this separately with the person who's asking the question.
Perfect. I'll connect you both, Neela. The next question, is it okay to have a home office than separate independent commercial space? No, I think we'll pass on with that question. Raghav, we'll definitely answer that later on. Should we declare only for foreign investments or even payments from customers? That's from Shan.
Yeah, so
I think that is pertaining to the international payments.
Yeah.
So it depends on the type of transaction. Typically, your routine payments from customers, etc., what are called current account transactions, okay, which are again a whole range of them are freely allowed. In certain cases, if it's export of software, etc., there is a form softex that may have to be filed. Okay, so typically your authorized dealer bank will be able to help you with this. In fact, if there are mandatory declarations or forms to be filed, they will actually alert you also to the requirement.
Perfect. When we offer services like teaching across India and sometimes across the world, what kind of legal and tax obligations we need to be aware of and abide with? That's from Nanda.
Again, it's fairly detailed and sort of fact-based analysis. So tax, unfortunately, I'm not a tax expert, so I won't be able to comment on that, right? Teaching, it depends again on the kind of services that you're offering. So again, very specific question. Happy to take that up separately.
Okay. So I'm going to ask one last question, Neela, and then we could take it forward and, you can kind of conclude there. But one very important and one of the first things which you addressed was about having the, the documentations and the file and the complete, compliance intact when you start out. Now, it's like that the chicken came first or the egg for us as founders, right? Especially when we start out as founders, there's a very thin line between an entrepreneur who's already got a registered entity and an entrepreneur who's just out there trying to test the idea, get a proof of concept, and go about it. So during these lines is where we get lost as founders. We get into the market to test the idea and get the proof of concept, and in the process end up incorporating a company because the clients are waiting in, and then we start catering to our early clients, and there between the line goes our compliance. That's a very commonly done mistake by founders. I today understand that, but I would love to, hear from you if there's any kind of, some tool, some kind of thought process from your side where an entrepreneur starting out who's at a stage of proof of concept to the point of where they're incorporated with investors, shareholders, some things which could help us to kind of take root of these compliances and the documentations.
Absolutely. So there's just one answer to that question, Salma. It's to hire a good, competent, ethical company secretary. Okay. Right? Because there are really good service providers in the market who are not very expensive, who are startup friendly, but who will take care of all your compliances for you. Right. So we work with several such very good company secretaries. Happy to pass on details to you as well.
Perfect.
So the idea being that when you've incorporated the company and then you're busy, like you said, establishing the business, you need to have a trusted partner who can take care of these things for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Neela. I think it was absolutely valuable. And thank you so much for coming in. And, it's late evening, but having you here with us has been a privilege. And yeah, Samvad Partners are very close to my heart, but still having you here was a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Salma. Thank you for calling me and look forward to being in touch. All the best.